back to front. Hello everybody, it's Infant Feeding Team again. It's Thursday and we are live for infant feeding questions today. We are Luddites, I'm afraid, so we've got help to help us today to get on board with our live. I'm Naomi, one of the infant feeding midwives.
I'm Elisa, infant feeding midwife too.
So a new face today, which is exciting, isn't it? And we're here for any questions that you might have for us today. So please do throw them at us. Anything to do with infant feeding. If you are doing questions about pregnancy or postnatal, if it's not feeding related, then please direct your questions to your midwife or ask your midwife, or one of the midwife sessions on here that suggests that we look at that you can talk about pregnancy or anything related to it. We are not working in that field all the time, so we might be a little bit out of date because things change all the time, and I think there's been more changes this week to the trust for visiting and things, and we're not up to scratch on that in all of the departments. So if you have got a question, direct it at your own midwives, please, because we won't be able to answer that question for you online.
Or you can also look onto the website, or UH website. They have an FAQ section for COVID-19, so you might find some new information there as well about visiting and similar things.
So today I'm going to just try and get on the phone. If you want to just talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about cues, weren't we? Feeding cues and things.
Yes.
So I'm going to look at find your questions if I can, and Elisa's going to just start talking to you for a moment.
Would you pass over Dole and Breastfeeding just quickly? We thought we'd just talk a little bit about babies' feeding cues, but also sometimes babies are working really hard to attach at the breast, and we might misinterpret their signs of really being ready to feed and trying really hard as signs that might be refusing the breast. So we thought we'd talk about this. So one of them is hands in the way. So when you're trying to feed your baby and then you get babies start suckling their hands, or they start pushing on your breast or touching around, sort of massaging, scratching, and sometimes they even push themselves away a little bit. They're working really hard, so they have some lovely reflexes and instincts that helps them sort of, if they were on top of you, it would help them crawl up and find the breast and help themselves to the breast in other positions. For example, if you have them in a cradle position, or you're lying on the side, and even underarm, their hands might come quite a lot in the way, and that is just them trying really hard to they're working really hard to attach to the breast, basically. So it's a sign that they're doing good work there. Another sign, sometimes as you're trying to breastfeed, you might notice that your baby suddenly starts looking somewhere else. It looks the other way. It looks like it's, it doesn't want the breast, and sometimes mothers struggle to interpret that, and they think, oh, my baby is not hungry or really doesn't want the breast. But actually, again, it's a reflex. It's called a rooting reflex, and it helps them find the breast. So anything touching their cheeks would sort of help them, so they'll turn their head towards it, open their mouth, trying to find the breast. So if there is a finger, one of your fingers, or a flap of their clothes, or a little flap of blanket, a bit of your clothes, anything that is touching their cheeks, they might just turn their head on that side and try and find the breast. So again, they're working really hard to try and breastfeed rather than refusing the breast.
And that will go quite nicely into one of the questions we've just received, actually. So this is from Lisa. She says, my baby has been exclusively breastfeeding for 8 weeks. How amazing is that? Aren't you a star? And seems to want to feed a lot in the daytime. At night, he's going 3 to 4 hours, sleeping after feeds, 11, 3 and 7, but now wants to feed more, and just after feeds is chewing his hands. And does this mean he isn't getting enough? Also, before feeds, he's now chewing his hands, and am I better substitute evening feed for a bottle? So that goes with the routine that you've just been talking about, doesn't it? But has he always been doing that, but been happy, or is he unhappy now? That's the question. And it might be that he's just going through a little bit of a growth spurt. It's also quite a lot warmer at the moment, and he might be a little bit more thirsty. And he's just exploring the world with his hands. He's found that he's got hands suddenly. He's aware of the world a little bit more around him. But also, he will, if he's found his hands, he'll be using them more, and he'll be moving his face towards his hands because he's stimulating exactly that reaching reflex that Elisa's just been talking about. I think you've got to look at all the picture with him. Is he reaching his milestones? We say that every week. Is he pooing and peeing well? So, enough poos a day, so 6 to 8 wet nappies a day. And is he doing, at least at 8 weeks, he should be pooing, frequently, not twice a day, like we say before 6 weeks. Babies after 6 weeks tend not to poo quite as much, and they don't always go every day. But are they normal poos when they do go? When he does go, so are they nice yellow seedy poos and good volumes of them? And is he reaching his milestones in the weight? So is he putting the appropriate amount of weight on? And I know it's difficult in these times to get your baby weighed, but is he filling his clothes up? Is he looking longer? Are you going up nappy sizes? Does he feel heavier? Has he got more rolls of fat on him? If he's feeding and settling at night, then he's, at least he knows how to do that, and he is able to manage going between feeds quite well. It might be just that he's having a bit of a growth spurt, or, he's enjoying feeding with his hands, and that's stimulating him to want to root all the time. If none of those things are happening, then, perhaps you can talk to your health visitor and just make sure and see if she can offer you any more advice personally for your circumstances. She'd be the person that will know you. Or indeed you can ring us and talk to us personally if you want to, and the numbers should be on the link below at the end of the session. I think they're added at each session for you. So apologies if we don't get all the questions from you, but we'll do our very best here. Does that answer your question? And if not, do come back to us, Lisa, okay? Do you want to read those? Okay,
yeah, that's absolutely fine. So we have Nicole, who's asking, my first baby got really frustrated with breastfeeding, which then I got really upset about it. I'm due in the next couple of weeks. Is there any advice I can have? Okay, lovely. So is that your baby is not quite, sometimes baby work really hard and find it a bit hard to attach, and then they find it quite frustrating even just to try and get near the breast. If that is the case, sometimes it's about building the breast as a happy place again, and the chest. So maybe if you are expressing
for this baby this time, do lots of skin to skin in the initial. I mean, we do talk a lot about skin to skin and the importance of skin to skin in the first few hours of your baby's life, and that primes lots of mothering instincts and lots of mammalian behaviour in babies, so that they start to realise that they crawl and they have a good feed. And I think the most important thing to say about this is the first feed that your baby has is the imprint. So if the baby doesn't have a really good feed in the early hours of its life outside of the uterus, that imprint isn't there, so it's much more difficult to get babies to feed. So if your first baby didn't feed so well in the early days, and that imprint wasn't there, and they had bottles, it might be that the imprint was the bottle rather than the breast. And so it's really important that you stimulate your breasts with hand expressing if your baby doesn't suckle, but try and get lots of support to get your baby on within the first hour to suckle, because that imprint is there, and then they remember what to do and they know that they can go back. So it's about asking for lots of help in the first 24 hours, particularly if you're in hospital where it's available. It is much more difficult to get help in these difficult times because there aren't clinics and things running in the same way. So it's really important that if you want to get good support, then think about how you're staying in hospital and don't go straight home. If you want to get a couple of feeds under your belt before you go home, just to be sure that you're holding your baby correctly. One of the brilliant ways to feed your baby, can I borrow your baby, please?
Absolutely.
One of the brilliant ways, and it's sort of actually it's idiot proof. You don't need any skills to do this as a mother or a midwife or a baby. And so you lean back in your chair and you face plant your baby. And this is one of my favourite positions really, because it doesn't require much skill. And you basically put your baby with its hands on either side of your nipples, on either side of your nipple. Its baby's feet are underneath the armpit on the other side. You're leaning back about 45 degrees. You're not flat, because that makes your baby a bit face planted with its nose as well. So if you're slightly upright, it makes it a bit easier. And then your baby will bob and just attach and go on. So it's a really good position for babies in the first couple of weeks, where you're learning how to hold a baby and you're learning how to feed a baby, and your baby's learning how to be outside of the womb. And so they often just fall onto the breast deeply and suckle well, and then they'll come off, and you can bring your arm round and just hold your baby like that. And then you have got a free hand to support a drink or your toddlers or whatever you've got, to read them a story and cuddle while you're feeding. And it is a very good way to feed. It tends to be very successful, and you can just kind of just plonk them on, literally. And that, you don't have to worry about pillows, you don't have to worry about lining the nose up to the nipple so much. You literally just put them on top of the nipple and let them try. And, you can do it with older babies as well, but they tend to be a bit bigger. But if you're learning and you're a bit sore and you're 2 weeks down the line and you're listening to me, have a go and just see if it helps the deeper attachment, so that it takes the soreness from your nipple if you're still struggling. It might help you. But that's a really good way to learn how to breastfeed, both of you, when you are in the early days. And it doesn't require as much skill as the classic way, which is lining your baby up in the right place, putting them in line and making sure that they have got free access and movement of their head, and they line the nose up to the nipple so that they're in that position there, so that when your baby is bringing its head back, it tilts its head up and the nipple goes to the top of the back of the roof of the mouth, rather than pushing the breast and the nipple onto the mouth and then it goes onto the tongue, and that rubs. It rub. But if you put it right up to the top of the back of the roof of the mouth and you line it up, the baby will sniff the air to go on and the chin will be leading. So if I'm to do this, I'm going to show you like that. So you're lined up like that, and your baby will put its head up like that, and the chin will hit the breast first, and the nipple will go up into the back of the roof of the mouth, and the chin will be right down here. So it's really important that you get that in line and get babies lined up really well, so that they get a really big mouthful. And then, it's a bit like putting your hand on a door handle. If you put it next to it, it doesn't open. If you put your hand on the handle, it opens the door. And your baby has to have its hand on the handle to breastfeed. It has to be in the right place. And if it isn't, it doesn't work. It does go wrong. You get sore nipples, your baby gets unsettled, they feed more frequently. All the things that has that domino effect when babies don't get enough milk. So if you line your baby up in the right place and you understand those principles, then your baby will do all the things that it should do, and it will transfer milk really well. And I think that's really important, that you understand that and you get the help to do that in the early days, so you don't get sore. It's really, it just takes everything away from breastfeeding if you're so sore that you can't breastfeed and you dread every feed. And it doesn't have to be like that. So, get lots of help, take everything that's offered to you and seek everything that you can find. And I think you will meet in the middle and do well. I think that's important.
Yeah, and I'd say as well, ideally, the help will be a lot hands-off. So if a baby is really, really handled quite a lot, and the head is, especially if the head is handled quite a lot to try and breastfeed, sometimes they get quite frustrated, and they might decide not to attach for quite a while, and they might get quite frustrated. So in that case, taking a bit of time just to relax with the baby, have lots of skin to skin, protect and maintain the supply with lots of expressing. If you find that there was quite a lot of confusion with the bottle, we can support doing different feedings, like cup feeding, finger feeding. We could, once baby's attached, we can try the supplementer at the breast. So there are lots of ways as well to avoid using a bottle and teats, if that is something that has caused quite a lot of confusion before.
I hope that helps you a little bit, Nicole. If you want to talk more to us, do. If you're struggling when you've had your baby, make sure that you ask for help as well when you come into hospital. Dinara, you've asked a question about labour. Can I just get you to direct that question to ask the midwife, or to your midwife in your own area, just to ask about the questions? It sounds like you're due soon and you're talking about labour, so do direct those questions to your midwife rather than here. We're talking about infant feeding this afternoon, if you don't mind, thank you. Claire Stewart, hello Claire, lovely to see you. Stacey, my baby is 10 days old and I have been breastfeeding. Well done. He feeds for a very long time. It can take me at least an hour and a lot of the time, and still not quite settled after a feed, and will want to feed not long after I've fed him. I'm worried that he's not getting enough, as this has always been the case. Thank you. So, is your baby gaining weight, Stacey? Are you still under the care of your midwives? Are they worried about the way that your baby is developing and gaining weight? And are the P's and Poos normal? That's the first thing we need to say. Feeding for an hour at a time is not an abnormal length of time for a breastfed baby. It's about up to 40 minutes on each breast. And we usually say get your baby fed and settled and back, settled after about an hour is perfectly appropriate. But what you do expect after you've done all of that is that your baby settles for for a little while. So 1 to 2 hours afterwards, your baby should be settling, so that you get a little bit of a break between. He shouldn't be then waking up as soon as you've finished and then asking for more. So is your positioning good? Are you sore? Is he going and doing the cues that we've talked about a minute ago about getting deep attachment? And you could talk about switch and compression, couldn't you?
Yeah, so we can talk about that. Something that sometimes helps babies, Naomi's just mentioned attachment, so definitely ensuring that the attachment is correct would be the first thing. And then what you could do sometimes if a baby sort of gets quite sleepy quite quickly and not quite getting much milk, is once you're feeding on one side, you will see initially quite a lot of suckles and swallows. Baby should be gulping the milk down and then starts getting a bit sleepy, slowing down quite a lot. At that point, you could use some compression. So when your baby suckles, you take a big handful of your breast quite close to the chest.
Go sideways on so they can see what you're doing. Yeah, I do lots of gymnastics when I do it.
Quite a big handful of your breast. Try to stay quite closer to your chest so that you're not pulling the breast outside of the baby's mouth. And then do a big compression, so you hold whilst your baby's suckling, and then when your baby stops, you release. And then once your baby starts suckling again, then you compress again and hold whilst the baby's suckling. And usually you should see that your baby starts swallowing and suckling and swallowing a little bit more. Sometimes they might open their eyes a bit more as they're getting a bit more milk.
Have you done any pumping? That's the other thing. Has anyone suggested that you do any pumping? Do you have access to a pump of any kind? Because sometimes you can do a little bit of pumping for 2 to 4 days after each feed, about 8 times a day, and do it about half an hour after a breastfeed. And that might just up your milk supply a little bit and stimulate your breast to produce a little bit more milk. And then you've got a little bit there if you need to give him extra. If you're worried about him not settling, but it will, more than anything, it increases your supply and will build your supply up, as will the compression and switch. It will make a difference, and it's a really good tool that you can do yourself without too much help. I think that you need to be, talking to us if he's not gaining weight and you're not making enough. And we can just put a few more personalised plans in place for you, rather than you struggling and leaving it for a week and then ringing us, because actually you're still in that lovely window where the clock's still ticking. Up to about 2 weeks you've got, where you just have time to build up your supply really well and do lots of stimulations. It goes up to about 2 weeks, and then the clock stops ticking a little bit, and it's harder to make milk after about 2 weeks. So you're in the time when you can really stump up your stimulations and really get the milk flow going, and that will help your supply, along with the compression and the switch feeding, and that will help. The thing with pumping as well that you'll find is that you can see what your breasts are doing while you're pumping. So there's a really good video called Hands on Pumping, Stanford University. It's about maximising your milk, and you can Google that. It's about a 9-minute video by Stanford University, and you can access that, and it shows you how to do hands-on pumping. So it shows you how to maximise the time that you're spending pumping to get the maximum amount, the minimum amount of time to the maximum amount of milk. And basically you do the compressions while you are pumping, and when you do that, you can see what's coming out of your breasts. And then when you're doing your compressions with your baby and you're doing your switching, like if you're pumping, you can see what your breasts are doing, and then you can see what your baby's getting when it's feeding, because your breasts will do the same but better when your baby's breastfeeding. So you can understand when your baby starts to suckle more and swallow. You can see why, because you can see as you compress that there's more milk comes into the funnel of the pump. You don't have to do pumping if you don't need to, but if you're worried about your supply, it's something that you might find quite helpful, just to kickstart your supply a little bit more, and it might just give you that extra bit where your baby becomes a bit more settled. So, if you want to talk to us further, do ring us up about that if you want to. I hope that helps, Stacey, but do get some help from your midwives as well. And we've got another Stacey as well, and she says, hello, I'm due my baby in just over a week, and can I ask if I can stay the night at hospital just to get the help with making sure the baby's latched correctly, and just to get some helpful tips, advice before I'm sent home. It's my second baby, and I really want to have a successful breastfeeding journey this time round. Absolutely, you can. If you feel that your baby's not suckling well and you just want to have that extra time, I think 24 hours is perfectly reasonable. If everything else is all right, they may ask you to leave after that, but at this point, you don't have to go immediately afterwards, and so you should be fine to stay for 24 hours and get some help. Your baby will have perhaps 3 or 4 feeds in that time, and that's really good practice with some support. So yes, do make sure that you get lots of help and have access to how you can get help when you go home as well. Make sure you know how to do that. Really important.
Also, I would say, bearing in mind some babies don't attach straight away for these different reasons. If that was the case, even with some good support, that could happen. If that is the case, and again, as we said before, lots of skin to skin, lots of hand expressing, you can get back some more support with your midwives from us as well. And I think there are other places like Oxfordshire Breastfeeding Support. They're closed at the moment, but in a couple of weeks they'll reopen, so you should have some support. So it's not all done. It's not the end if the baby's not attached straight away. There's lots of support available afterwards, and we can help you with
lots
that.
Of skin to skin, because that will always encourage your baby to do its cues that it should to feed, and recognise that as the place where your baby wants to be to get a feed. It becomes normal to your baby to have that. Lisa's come back saying that she thinks this is her baby's 8 weeks, just thinking that he's a really hungry baby, and why is he feeding lots in the day, and shall I introduce a bottle to keep him satisfied? What do you think?
Some babies just go through phases. It depends on for how long it's been and how it goes at night, but often what happens is that babies have either a part of the day where they'll feed all the time, and if you feel that you're feeding all the time, probably you're doing things right. Because feeding implies feeding, and in here we're used to feed and then have the baby down. Culturally we're used to this sort of you need a break, but actually in other cultures if they've done some surveys and babies feed 4 times an hour each hour or more. So it is quite common, and I would say it would sound normal if your baby's feeding really frequently for a part of the day or the night, and then has a period of time where it would sleep a little bit more.
It's got to get the feeds in, so if it has longer sleeps in the night, it's got to get the food in during the day. And all women have different breast capacity, so their breasts hold less volumes and more volumes, and so it depends on what your breast volume is as to how much your baby can take. So if you have a low volume, it's normal, but your baby needs to feed more frequently. So somebody that's got low capacity in their breast will feed 12 times a day, and some babies that have got large capacity, women that have got large capacity in their breast may only feed 5 times in 24 hours. And as long as your baby is reaching what it should be doing, that should be normal. So if your baby's feeding, 12 or 13 times a day in 24 hours, that's normal. What your baby might well be doing is just stepping up the milk composition. So the frequent feeding that he's doing, he's saying to the breast, right now, I'm 8 weeks old, I'm getting to be quite a big boy now, and my development is that I need these things in breast milk now, and I want you to start making them. And so, the composition of the milk will change to develop his growing needs. And so that might take 2 or 3 weeks, and then he'll settle down again. So, don't have the expectation that he'll go 4 hours between feeds. All the time, even at 8 weeks. He's still a very tiny little baby and needs to feed frequently, and ask your breasts to make milk frequently so that you can fulfill his needs. And you'll do this again at about 12 weeks, where you literally will have to stop for a week, and feed him, because he will just be attached to you for 12, for all day and every day, for about a week. And he may well start to feed more frequently at night again at about 12 weeks, for about a week, around about then, between 12 and 14 weeks. And that's when they're stepping up the next level. And the good feeding that you have done at birth and in the first 2 weeks is calibrating for that time. So he is asking at birth for what his needs are going to be when he's 12 weeks old. And that's really important for you to understand, that is a calibration period. He is setting it. So we talk about not introducing other things other than breast milk and expressed milk that you've had, so that you're not interfering with that calibration period, that your baby is telling you what his needs are going to be as he grows. And that's what your baby's doing, and they step it up themselves. So you might have a busy day where you're feeding all day, and then a better day, and then you have another busy day, and you think, oh well, I'm not going to get anything done, and then the next day he sleeps all day. And you could have done something, and then you think, oh, well, I'll do it the next day, and he has another busy day. And that's him stepping up milk supply. And it's really important that you understand the normality of it. But if it doesn't feel normal to you, then talk to somebody. And then we can talk through what is exactly going on, so that you don't feel that you have to introduce a bottle. Because it's not necessarily going to make it any better. And what it might do is interfere with your milk supply, and or stimulate you to get mastitis or something, which could make it worse. So talk to us if you need to, talk to your health visitor if you need to. Your baby just might be having a busy time, and then he will settle down. He's sleeping better at night, he's settling, and that means that you're getting more sleep at night. That's really good. He's not doing it at night and sleeping all day, which is really frustrating, because sometimes they do that as well. So, keep going, but talk to somebody if it doesn't feel right to you, just to check in, okay? I hope that helps you.
And also, I would just say, in case you don't feel like talking to anyone, but you want to introduce a bottle, I'd say you could consider expressing rather than introducing anything else. That would really, introducing formula could really impact on your milk supply. So you could consider expressing, again, bearing in mind that sometimes it doesn't work straight away if you haven't done it. Some mothers feed very well, baby's growing, and then when they're expressed, they don't see much milk. So it might take a little while, so it might be not something that you are able to do straight away. Again, if you need us, give us a ring or send us an email.
Claire, hello Claire. Yes, we saw. I saw you last week, and you're doing so well with your lovely baby. Baby's 6 weeks. You saw Elisa at 5 days, and you're still exclusively breastfeeding and doing such an amazing job. But you're worried about the latch not being quite right. I think maybe go back to a slightly more traditional way. See if it helps now that you've improved the latch a bit and you know what it feels like. Maybe try some different positions again and go back to different positions and just see if that improves it. It might be that you need to lean back a little bit more if you're doing laid back positioning, just to see. But do call us, Claire, if you're still struggling, okay, and we'll talk you through it again. All right, just because we've seen you doesn't mean we can't see you again. Hope that helps. Stacey says, thank you very much. Sharon's watching. Hello, Sharon, one of our #1 fans. Bria, hello. Yes, I saw you yesterday. I hope you're okay. Could you demonstrate how to bottle feed a baby with a high palate so that my husband is able to watch it and see how he should be doing it? Thank you. That's brilliant. Please could you also demonstrate the key parts for reclined breastfeeding, as my little girl is getting frustrated during it and I wanted to make sure I'm doing it right. Thank you. Okay, so do you want a bottle?
Do you want to do the bottle and
Yeah.
I can do the reclining? Probably.
See if I can find the bottle.
Otherwise, we'll start with reclining and then we'll find the equipment.
Okay.
Have it.
So when you look at babies' palates, they're all variation. All palates are variation of normal. You've got to remember that a palate is a every shape of your baby is a variation of normal. It's not abnormal. Some palates are not present, and that's when you've got cleft palate, where there's not fully formed palate. But all the other palate shapes are just what you're given. And actually, if you think about your the roof of your mouth, which is your palate, if you put your thumb in your mouth and you go up, you can feel where your palate is and what it feels like. And some palates are like rainbows, and they're just very smooth all the way around. Some are little sort of round with a little blip on them, and that's just a little bit more. And then some are much more, which could be what we call a bubble palate, which looks like a bubble in the top of your baby's mouth. So it might be that it's smooth, and then it goes up, and then it comes down, and so there's like a bubble in the middle of your palate. And all of those are normal, but what it does create is more feeding problems because you've got to work with the shape of your palate. It doesn't mean that your baby can't feed, but you've just got to work with what your baby has. And that's very important that you understand that, so that your baby can maximise the tongue function, and it can create a really good vacuum. So if your palate is really high, like that, can you see that? If your palate's really high, then you've got to get the nipple or the teat up into that space. If it's round like that, then it's going to be much easier to fill that space and get a really good vacuum, so the tongue can function properly to take milk out. So if the palate is slightly higher, you need to just direct it up a little bit. And it might be that you need to put your baby slightly further down. So if you're feeding your baby, we normally would say with responsive feeding is that you hold your baby close and slightly sitting up, and you hold the bottle at a level like that. Now, if your baby is really struggling to feed, you need to put the palate up. You need to put the bottle up into the palate, but you may need to just tip your baby slightly further backwards to do that. Just very carefully, and make sure that you've got a teat that's not, going to just pour into their mouth. You've got to have one that they can control a little bit. So don't give them a fast flow teat or anything. And just make sure that you're directing that teat. Just look at where the palate is. Have a little look in your baby's mouth, and you can see that it just needs to go up rather than straight. So rather than it going straight across there, you need to just direct it up into that space that you've got, so that you can get the tongue to work properly and take the milk out. So I hope that answers your question, Greer, in terms of, is that helpful for you with transferring milk? Just so that you secure that nipple goes right up, and don't become too paranoid about the palate. It is a normal palate. Don't say, oh, my baby's not going to feed because it's got a high palate. It's got a normal palate, which is higher than somebody's that might live next door to you. But, his ears might be a different shape, and his nose is a different shape, and his feet are a different shape, and you're not going to worry about those. And the palate is what he has, that's what he's born with, and that's normal. So you work with it, just like you buy wide feet shoes, or you buy something different to fit what you have. It's individual. And so don't make a really big thing of it, just work with what you have, and get the teat right up into the top of it, so that you can transfer that milk. And you just might need to tip him back slightly more in order for him to get the milk out of the teat. And he will learn to deal with that. If you're still struggling, talk to us again. Okay, Greer? Don't not. We can talk to you again if that helps.
And also for the others watching, we do an oral assessment, where we do look at the shape of the palate together with other things, not on all babies, just on babies who are particularly struggling, or mothers who are particularly sore when breastfeeding, babies who are struggling to attach, or babies who are struggling to get enough milk for them from the breast when breastfeeding. Don't expect that we're going to do, that not every baby is going to be checked for the shape of the palate. And that's normally not really relevant unless there is a problem. And then Greer, I think you had asked about principles about laid back sort of feeding.
We did a bit of that yesterday, didn't we?
So I would say it works for most, but it doesn't work with all shapes of the breasts.
We talked about face planting, didn't we?
Yeah. Naomi has already talked earlier about face planting, so that would be, again, reclining sort of about 45 degrees and having your baby. The position really depends a bit on the shape of your body and your breast and the shape of the baby, how tall the baby is, and where you're comfortable. But it would be baby lying with their tummy on you, their sort of face looking slightly downwards, and the hands around the breast, so that they can sort of crawl and look. And what you might notice that your baby sort of bobs their head a little bit around, and if you put them, I don't know if you can see from there, but if you put your baby sort of, again, nose to nipple, so it's coming from below the nipple, they usually find the breast on their own. Now, as it happened with you, if your baby has a high palate, on occasion you might need to start in a different position and do what is called the exaggerated latch, or using a flipple technique.
I think we did a little bit when we pulled the nipple back yesterday.
If you're starting in this position, you might need to sort of shape a little bit your breast and pull with your thumb so that your nipple is pointing to the nose or to the roof of the mouth again. See how it goes. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to do when you're reclining back, so you might need to start in a slightly different position, get your baby attached, and then recline back. There is a good link to a video about the exaggerated latch that you can look on one of the La Leche League articles that is called Positioning and Attachment. If you look, La Leche League, Great Britain, Positioning and Attachment, at the end they have quite lovely videos about positioning and attachment, including the exaggerated latch, so you can maybe watch that and then get back to us if you feel that you need more support.
Call us back, Ria. Okay, don't struggle, and we can talk you through it again. So Megan's contacted us. Hi, does taking labetalol for gestational hypertension affect breastfeeding from birth in any way, please? I have read that harvesting colostrum can be helpful as babies' sugars may be low. Any advice would be appreciated. Thank you. So the answer is yeah.
Yeah, I can do it. Yeah, I mean, what we look into is that babies sometimes, as soon as they're born, when a mother is having labetalol throughout pregnancy, they have a bit of an increased risk of dropping their blood sugars when they're adapting to being outside of the uterus. So what we suggest is to feed your baby frequently. We would usually suggest to sort of avoid leaving gaps for more than 3 hours from the start of a feed to the start of the next feed. It's again not for all babies, it's mainly for babies who are at risk of dropping a little bit their blood sugars. And that's where collecting a bit of colostrum before your baby's born can be helpful. And it's mainly because we do know in general that some babies don't attach straight away. And in that way, if you need to feed your baby quite frequently, you might have some with you, and you might also be quite used to hand expressing at that point,
skill.
Because then you would need, if your baby's then not attaching, you would need to do quite frequent hand expressing to protect your milk supply and feed your baby frequently. So that might be helpful. Again, there are quite good videos about hand expressing on UNICEF website, or you can look onto the Leche League Great Britain website. They have quite good articles about it. So it can come quite handy. I think the only thing to highlight is if you're hand expressing before your baby's born, if you get quite a lot of colostrum collected, don't bring all of it in hospital, because we don't always have a freezer available. So if all of it defrosts, then you can only use it within 24 hours and you might waste some. So maybe bring just a little bit that you might use, and then in case someone can bring it to you later if needed. And the other thing to highlight is if you have collected quite a lot of colostrum before your baby's born, and then your baby's not attaching and it's not feeding at the breast, then you would need to start hand expressing straight away. So you can't sort of just rely on the colostrum that you had collected for a few days and then start hand expressing, because that really frequent stimulation of the breast in the early days, in the early
Never
hours.
take your foot off the accelerator. Never take
Keep
your foot
going.
off. 2 weeks of really, you know, we really can't say that enough about the clock ticking. You know, that you can't do it tomorrow. You have to do it yesterday. You really do. You know, it's so important that you do those stimulations, and particularly if you've got any you know, medical things going on. We talk about you know, hypertension, polycystic ovarian, any other endocrine disorders, hypothyroid, where your thyroid levels are low, you know, inflammatory bowel disease. All of these things are sort of endocrine driven and diabetic, and they will have an impact on baby's blood sugars and also on your milk supply and the prolactin levels in your pituitary gland, which is where everything's driven from. And so, you know, you have to really be switched on with your skills, and that's why we talk about antenatal harvesting of colostrum with people that have, you know, any of those disorders, particularly because you have got a really super duper skill by the time you come into hospital. So it's one less thing for you to worry about learning when you've had your baby, and it might be that you've had a cesarean. And we know that mums that have cesareans are more likely to do less skin to skin because they feel really, you know, rotten. They've got numb from the waist down. They're quite shivery, shaky, feeling sick. You know, it's a bit overwhelming. You're lying flat on your back usually, and you know, somebody's rummaging about inside your tummy. And you know, so then we say, well, let's have a lovely, cuddly session with your baby. And it's, you know, you feel that it's a real challenge. And we know that the less skin to skin you do, you know, the supply is vulnerable. So you have to do lots of catch up when you can, and lots of really good stimulations by hand expressing if your baby is either separated from you or very, very sleepy, depending on the circumstances. So it's really important that you have that skill and you have a supply if you can. You don't need loads and loads, but you've got little bits to give to your baby because it's like liquid gold. You know, it's pure sugar, it's pure calories, it's pure golden syrup to your baby, and little tiny bits have got really high calorific value to your baby, and not only that, it lines your baby's gut as well. So we can't underestimate the importance of colostrum and colostrum harvesting if you have got any issues, as you've talked about with you. But do remember, you've got to keep doing it even if you've got loads to bring in. You've just got to keep doing it afterwards as well. You can't just sit in your arms and say, I've got enough to keep going for a day. You cannot stop hand expressing in that first day, because you will fall behind if you've had you know, much more instrumental delivery where you haven't been able to cuddle your baby so well, or you've had, you know, a little bit more blood loss where you're feeling very shaky after you've had your baby, or very long labour. You know, when you're very, very tired, you don't want to cuddle the baby, you just want to roll over and go to sleep when you've had a long labour. And unfortunately, you don't have that luxury. You've got to look after your baby and do skin to skin and hand expressing to protect your milk supply. And you know, the number of people that come back to us and say, I wish I'd done it, I wish I'd known that I had to do it, because nobody said you've got to do the skin to skin to them, and you have got to do it. You've just got to do it and do hand expressing if your baby's not suckling, so that you just put all of those things in place to make enough milk for a week's time, because it takes so much longer to make the milk later than it does in the early days when you're putting the order in. And that's for long-term breastfeeding. So I hope that answers your question, Megan. I hope it helps you. Lisa said she's going to persevere for now, and thanks for your continued help. Rachel, I have an almost 3-week-old, and he's been on me constantly since 10 a.m. this morning. Can cluster feeding happen at any time of day? Also, my nipples are a bit sore, but I can't tell if she's latching deeply enough.
Okay. So maybe we can have a look at the picture about latch that so Naomi earlier was explaining how to try and achieve quite a deep latch where the nipple is going right at the back of the mouth, where there's more space and where they can get more milk and you can get a comfortable feed. How old was it? 10
3
days?
weeks.
Oh, 3 weeks. 3 weeks.
You've done very well to get that far, Rachel.
Yeah,
well done.
definitely. I mean, 3 weeks probably it is a good time for a little growth spurt there. So, you know.
But sometimes, you know, your supply drops a little bit because, you know, in the first 2 weeks you make enough for 6 babies because you're a mammal. Your body doesn't know how many babies you've had. And suddenly it works out that you've only got 1, and so the supply drops for 1 baby, and that goes back to the early days when you put your stimulations in. Did you do lots of stimulation? Because the body then says, oh, I've only got half a baby because you've only done half the stimulations. So your milk supply will drop between 2 and 3 weeks. And it might be that you're just having to build that supply up again and your baby's doing it for you, isn't it? So it might not be positioning attachment, but it might be. And those pictures, if you put those up,
especially if you are a bit sore, it is worth, as you're doing and asking, looking at the latch. So I don't know if you should be able to see them there. So in one picture you will see a baby who's starting nose to nipple. I would say in that picture actually you could start even closer so that the mouth is already touching the breast below the nipple and the nipple is touching either the nose or between the nose and the mouth, so that the baby's already there, and that might help your baby open the mouth wider rather than having that little gap where they're not actually, even if they're really close, like the handle story that Naomi was talking about earlier. If they're there, they know they can feel the breast and they know that they're on the breast and they will open the mouth wider. And then as you see in the other picture, you can see that the baby's coming onto the breast in a way where the nipple is not going straight into the mouth. It's at the top. It looks a little bit counterintuitive, probably for most. So most would think, you know, I need to feed my baby, milk it in the breast, the, you know, nipple goes straight in the mouth. But actually that way babies cannot get much milk and mothers can feel quite sore. So trying to get this type of angle, if you're starting really nicely nose to nipple with the mouth actually quite far from the nipple, once your baby opens their mouth and you're sort of helping them a bit closer, if you're in any sideline position, you might need to bring them close to you. As you're pressing on their upper back and the back of the neck, you will see that they'll tilt their head back, and you can get that nice angle, sorry, it's here, that nice angle that you have here. So the nipple is really going to the top and the back of the mouth. I would say probably in this picture again, you might have the hand even a bit lower. I don't know if you can see, so that sometimes the head needs to tilt even a little bit more.
Much more exaggerated than you think.
Yeah. Not necessarily completely, but just needs to be quite free to tilt. If you do try at home, if you try to open your mouth with your head straight or even slightly tilted forward as if someone was sort of holding, you will see that you can't open it very wide. And if you then try and open it when you tilt your head a little bit back, you will see the difference. We have another picture here which I'll show you just now. And again, so you're bringing your baby with the chin leading, and again the nipple is going at the top of the mouth and at the back rather than going in centrally. And if your baby is well attached, the chin will be completely indenting in the breast. You usually don't see very well the chin or the mouth, and the nose should be free. You can see quite a lot of the areola, so the dark part of the breast at the top, so where the baby's nose is, and you usually wouldn't see much at the bottom. The feed should feel comfortable. You would see your baby suckling and swallowing quite a lot. So if your baby's doing quite a lot of really, really fast suckle, and you don't see much of their chin dropping down and swallowing, or you can't hear them swallow very much, or you notice that they get quite sleepy, it might be that the attachment is not quite the best.
But at 3 weeks, it might be that she's just stepping up the milk production a little bit, and it's quite warm. And she, you know, you might find in 48 hours time that you've got fuller breasts and they're doing a little bit more dripping and she's a little bit more settled again, and that's what happens. You know, with breastfeeding it takes 48 hours to do anything, so you don't feed your baby and see a change, you wait for 2 days to see your change, and that's why people find it so difficult to do, because, you know, when you're pumping and you're not getting much out, and you're breastfeeding and your baby's not settling, and you know, you're doing all of these things to increase your milk supply and you don't see change straight away, people get really demoralised. But actually it all suddenly comes together, but it takes time, and you know, it takes, if you've got low supply and you do lots of pumping, so you pump 8 times a day and you're feeding and you're having to top your baby up and you're breastfeeding and compressing and switching, and this might be a very familiar language to a lot of you watching that you've been through that. It's punishing, but actually it's, if you do it well, full on 8 times a day pumping and all the other things, it tends to turn it around within a couple of weeks. And I do say this all the time, if you just trickle along and pump 4 times a day and you know, do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, it takes you, you'll still be doing it at 6 weeks, you know, because you have to really give yourself that kickstart where you're surging the hormone levels really high and you're really doing lots of prolactin stimulations and prolactin receptor stimulations in your breast. That really gives a massive jolt to it, and you turn it around and get more milk, and people will come back and say, yes, it took 2 weeks and now I'm doing really well. But there will be some of you that it's taken a bit longer than that and you're doing amazing things, but you know, it's about the stimulations and the frequency in the early days that produces that milk supply. And you know, I spend all day saying this, and I spend every week that I've done this, I think this is number 17 that we've done. We talk about frequency of stimulation, frequency of hand expression, frequency of feeding, and looking at the 4 reliable signs, so suckling and swallowing, peeing, pooing and weight. Those are our 4 reliable signs of milk transfer, and recognising those. So your baby should be suckling and swallowing. It should be, you could audibly hear your baby swallow, you know, that when it's feeding, that you can hear that frequently, maybe every swallow, every other swallow, every other suckle you hear a swallow. And there should be movement, and your baby's eyes are normally open when it starts to get milk, and then as it becomes more sleepy, it will close its eyes but keep sucking, and then you might get another letdown, which you may not feel, but your baby will suddenly open its eyes and start to suckle again, and that's another letdown, and then you might get another one. And your baby responds to that by opening its eyes, and babies open their eyes with flow. So if your baby's frequently feeding and never looks like it's engaged with you, and chomp, 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 and you know, that might be a sign that your milk supply is a little bit low. So you need to talk to somebody if your baby's not pooing or weeing well, because that could be the indicator that actually your supply is a little bit down. So, you know, the suckling and swallowing tells you one thing, and then peeing, lots of heavy wet nappies, and then pooing, you know, two poos a day, yellow poos a day minimum. That's minimum, up to 6 weeks, and then not so frequently. And the poo should be bright yellow. It should be a lovely bright yellow seedy colour. It shouldn't be green or brown. So if your baby's not pooing very much and it's pooing brown poos or very green poos, then you probably need to have a conversation with somebody about what's going on, particularly in the early days if the weight's not great.
And if you want to know more about this, if you're in the early days, you might have a care plan coming from hospital with breastfeeding checklist, and you can find again information about 4 reliable signs, and you can do sort of a self-assessment there. And again, about knowing that your baby's getting enough milk. You have Off to the Best Start leaflets. We do give them here when you go home from hospital or any of the birth centres. But you can find it as well quite easily online. If you just write Off to the Best Start leaflet, you will find it straight away. You know, Start for Life, UNICEF, you will find it. And on page 17 you have here the 4 reliable sign. It shows the colours of the poos, and it will tell you how many wet and dirty nappies to expect at what stage, so that might be helpful for you to look into.
And I hope that answers your question about the cluster feeding, Rachel. Babies do cluster feed, absolutely they do, and it's at different times of day, but you know, it's going to be 37 degrees tomorrow apparently, so you know, your babies will be stepping it up. They may feel the weather changing before you do, and she's doing it for tomorrow so that she's got more milk tomorrow, maybe, I don't know. But yes, they do cluster feed, but it shouldn't be constant. She should have periods of rest where she's happy as well. But if it's just one day and you're tied to her, then that sounds normal. But if it's all the time and she's not doing the things that we've talked about, and she's not gaining 20 grams a day, which is not always easy at this time when you can't weigh babies very easily, but she doesn't look like she's gaining weight, or her clothes aren't looking like she's filling them anymore, then you do need to talk to your health visitors and see if you can get some support and just check that she's doing what she should be doing. Or ring us, that's absolutely fine, or OBS, it's fine. Sean is watching. Hello, Sean. You're always watching. You're one of our fans. That's fabulous. Lovely to have you with us. Claire is saying, I'm 38 weeks today and would love to breastfeed. So I was just wondering if I could start harvesting colostrum around now. If so, what is the best way of doing this and how would I store it, please? Oh, yes, it's a perfect time to do it, isn't it? Absolutely perfect time to do it. And has anyone shown you how to hand express? That's the most important thing. And have you got any of these syringes? So your midwife can give you those syringes. If you ring up, she could perhaps arrange for you to collect some. You can use a little teaspoon, or you can use a pot of any kind, or you can use an ice cube tray, and make sure it's clean and sterilised if you're going to freeze everything. But syringes are absolutely fine as well. And if you're doing some hand expressing, make sure that you're comfortable and you're private. And if you're feeling vulnerable, make sure it's that you're in a safe place, so that you, because it's hormonally driven, and that means that your oxytocin, the hormone of love, is very shy. So if you are feeling very stressed, you won't give as much milk as if you're very relaxed. And we know that if you do hand expressing when your baby's in skin to skin, the milk starts to pour much more easily than if you have your baby crying next to you. You won't produce anywhere near as much. So if you want to be in a bathroom, in the shower, you can do that while you're warm. And the first thing we'd say is to massage your breast so that you stimulate the milk production to start to come forward. And you can go around all your breasts, you go around both and massage them. And then you go to the base of your nipple and you go 2 to 3 centimetres behind the base of your nipple, so that you're on the breast tissue. And your breasts start to feel slightly different. You feel a bit lumpy. It's a bit like broccoli stalks. You just feel it's a bit lumpy, and your breast changes texture a little bit. So when you feel that sort of 2 to 3 centimetres back, then you can push your breast back slightly with your thumb and your finger, so you're making a C shape, and then push back and then squeeze. Imagine you're putting the edges of your areola together. So you're imagining that you're folding your breast in on itself. And so it's quite firm. It's not a rub. You don't want to be rubbing, because that will just make you sore and it won't actually take milk from the ducts in the same way. You need to really target areas in your breast and hold and squeeze for about 4 seconds and then release. And then you push back and you hold and squeeze for about 4 seconds and then you relax. And you start to see little droplets maybe appearing on the end of your nipple. There's lots of little holes in the end of your nipple, little where the ducts the milk comes from, the ducts out into the open. And you may see little bits coming through it might be white, it might be orangey, it might be clear. Everybody is individual, and it's all normal with those things. Sometimes it's even pinky coloured, it's a little bit blood-stained, mostly on both sides, and that's just where the capillaries have started to just sever a little bit and have not been used, and that should clear as well. But it is normal to see a little bit of blood sometimes in your colostrum. If you're not sure, talk to somebody about it. Sometimes it can be a bit greeny as well, and that's also normal, mostly normal. Don't tend to worry about it, but it's usually on both sides. And so you can then walk around your breast. Okay, so you can just walk around in a 360 degrees like a clock face, and you go around. And then you would go to the other side and you would do the same. And then you would come back to this side and do the same again. And then go back to this side again. So you do a couple of goes on each side to really stimulate that milk supply, so that you can start collecting. And the way to freeze it is in a freezer. You can put it in the fridge for 5 days and put it in a freezer for 6 months. It can be on the side for 24 hours, can't it?
Colostrum.
Yeah,
So
colostrum,
I'd
24
say
hours.
not in the next couple of days, maybe when it's going to be really hot. I would suggest probably
keeping it in your fridge
keeping
if
it
you
nice
can.
and cool quite quickly.
And one last question I would say, because we have been an hour and I'm aware of the time, but Imi has asked a question: do you recommend having a box of formula as standby in case I can't breastfeed? I really want to try. So turn the language round. Don't want to try, you want to do it. And can't isn't a word, you can, and with lots of help. You know, you don't need to get a bottle of formula. You know, if you feel really desperate, shops are open all the time now, so you know that isn't available. But you don't need to have formula in the house. You can. This is your emergency care. This is your emergency care. Hand expressing. Okay, that's what will get colostrum out to give your baby in the early days. And when you've got milk, then they get plenty from either hand expressing or pumping. But actually, no, you don't need to get colostrum just in case, because the chances are you will use it when you're very, very tired, and you don't need to. You've got to just, you know, trust your instincts and trust your baby and trust your body that you will make enough milk for your baby, and get help. And make sure you ask lots of help and get people to check your positioning. Okay.
And
so,
also, I would just add on a quick note, of course, depending on where you are giving birth and which area you're in, here in Oxford we are quite lucky because we do have a milk bank, so we do have donor milk available.
Yes, we talked a lot about that last week. We showed you lots of pictures about the milk
there
bank
is
last
donor
week.
milk available in hospital, quite rarely I'd say, but sometimes even later. So if you feel that, you know, it's just a small amount that you need maybe to fill a gap or take away the pressure for expressing, you know, we can support you often help with that.
Okay, so thank you so much all for your time. It's lovely to have you all watching again, and please get in touch with us if you need to, and we will see you, Elisa and I will see you next Thursday for more questions. So thank you so much for taking part. All right,
Take
bye
care.
for now.
Bye.